They told us this mission would last just 3 days. Instead, 2 months had gone by, and we had made sure not a single enemy survived. That was the thought I clung to while crouching behind a jagged hunk of coral, about the size of a car, as Japanese machine gun fire chewed away at my only cover. We'd been stuck on this miserable island of Peleliu for 74 days, and the enemy was still launching attacks from the high ground ridges and caves like they were possessed. I'm Corporal Jack Sullivan, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. By now, I was supposed to be back in Australia, sipping a cold drink and writing letters to my sweetheart in Boston. Instead, I was stuck in what was supposed to be a quick mission. The brass had said it would take 3, maybe 4 days to take this 6-mile stretch of coral and jungle out in the middle of nowhere. But the Japanese clearly had a different plan. It was November 15, 1944. We were still trying to flush them out of their hideouts. The heat hadn't let up in 2 months. It never dropped below 90 degrees. My uniform was rotting off me, and my rifle was so clogged with dust and grit that I had to clean it constantly just to keep it working. I'd lost 23 pounds since the landing back on September 15th, but we hadn't given up. We kept pushing forward, kept fighting, kept doing what Marines do. That machine gun opened up again, sending rounds that sparked off the coral around me. I pressed myself deeper into the ground and scanned for the source of the fire. It looked like it was coming from a dark opening about 50 yards up the slope. The Japanese had transformed this place into a maze of tunnels and bunkers cut right into the coral. "Hey, Sullivan." Staff Sergeant Martinez slid in next to me. Sweat and dust streaked across his face. "You see that nest?" "Yeah, Sarge. Looks like it's set about 30 feet inside the cave. We gotta knock it out. They've got us all pinned down." He pulled out his map. What remained of it after being soaked with sweat, rain, and blood for weeks. "Intel says there's a whole cave network up there. Could be 50 of them, could be 500. I looked toward that slope. The enemy machine gun was practically invisible, just a slit in the coral, but it was placed perfectly to control the ground below. Textbook Japanese defensive reposition, designed to kill. They'd had time to make this place a nightmare. Every approach was a trap. "How many times we gonna hit that ridge?" "Sarge, as many as it takes." Martinez replied grimly. "Colonel Puller's orders. We take it today or we don't come back." Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, just hearing his name could steel your nerves. The most decorated Marine in the Corps. And he wasn't sitting behind a desk somewhere. He was right here with us on Peleliu, leading the charge like always. If he said we were taking that ridge, then that's what we were doing. But getting there alive was another matter. "Who's still with us?" I asked. Martinez took a moment. "Yumi, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams. That's it. 5 out of 13. He paused, then added, "Henderson got hit in the chest yesterday. Morrison stepped on a mine this morning." He didn't mention the others, and he didn't have to. We had started this mission with 13 solid Marines. Now we were down to 5. Most of the rest were either dead, buried in this cursed ground, or wounded and long gone to field hospitals. The Japanese made us bleed for every step, but we gave it back harder. Before we landed, Intel said the island had over 10,000 well-equipped enemy soldiers, dug in and ready to fight to the end. They weren't kidding. What the intel didn't tell us was just how fanatical they'd be or how expertly they had set up their defenses. When it was finally over on November 27th, almost all of those Japanese troops were dead. Just 19 of them survived, along with a couple hundred forced laborers from Korea and Okinawa. The rest chose death over surrender, holding out in bunkers and tunnels until flamethrowers or grenades ended it. But that was still 12 days away. Right now, those enemy troops were very much alive and hell-bent on taking us with them. "All right. Listen up," Martinez said, checking his Thompson. "We're going to push up that slope using cover and fire. Sullivan, you and Williams lay down fire. Rodriguez, Thompson, and I will move. When we're in place, we'll give you cover while you move." Standard infantry tactics, stuff we'd drilled endlessly back at Camp Pendleton. But training in California and doing it for real under live fire on a Pacific ridge were two different worlds. I looked over my M1. 7 rounds left. 3 clips on my belt. 2 grenades. That was all I had. We'd been short on supplies ever since command decided this was just cleanup and pulled back support. "You ready, Sullivan?" Martinez asked. I glanced at that cave again. Somewhere inside, enemy soldiers were getting ready to do to us what we were planning to do to them. "Ready, Sarge? Then let's go do our job." 2 months earlier, on September 15th, the skies were clear as we neared the shores of Peleliu. From a distance, the island didn't look like much flat coral land with palm trees and an airfield in the middle. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. That was our first mistake. "Remember the plan," Martinez had said as our landing craft turned in. "Take the airfield on day 1. Once that's done, the rest will fall into place." By then, I'd been in the Corps for 2 years. I knew things rarely went according to plan, but even that didn't prepare me for what we walked into. The enemy had dug in deep. Overlapping fire zones covered every inch of the landing area. On that first day alone, more than 200 Marines were killed, and the casualty count hit over 1,000 as we struggled to gain a foothold on the beach. I remember hitting the shore and diving for cover while bullets tore through the sand around me. They'd placed their guns high on coral ridges with perfect views of the beach, able to rain down fire without any blind spots. Move, move, Sergeant Williams was yelling as we dashed across the beach toward anything that might protect us. Tree trunks, debris, even wrecked landing craft. The noise was overwhelming. Guns rattling, mortar bursting, rifles cracking, men shouting for medics, and the sharp buzz of bullets flying by. I made it to a crater about 50 yards from the water and dropped beside 2 Marines I didn't know. One was bleeding badly from the head. The other was fiddling with a radio. "Where's the rest of our unit?" I yelled. "Spread all over the place," the radio man replied. "Half are stuck near the water. The others are trying to push toward the airfield." The airfield was maybe 800 yards away, but it might as well have been miles. The ground between us and it was wide open and completely exposed. By the second day, we finally managed to take the position. Around 500 Japanese troops were killed in those opening battles. But that was just the start. The entire island was packed with traps, caves, tunnels, bunkers, and fortified slopes that would take weeks to clear. The worst part of it all was the heat. Just a few degrees north of the equator, Peleliu was a furnace. Coral dust got into everything, and the constant strain of combat wore men down. Guys were collapsing left and right, not from wounds, but from the heat. The island itself was trying to kill us as much as the enemy was. We figured it out. We adapted. We learned to move at dawn and dusk, to take breaks when the sun was highest, and to conserve every drop of water. And we learned to take our enemy seriously. The soldiers defending Peleliu were not like the ones we'd fought before. These were skilled, hardened fighters under the command of Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, one of the Imperial Army's best. No wild charges like in earlier battles. This was smart, patient defense, and it cost us dearly. By October, we held the airfield and the southern part of the island. But the northern ridges, which we called the Unimaginable Pocket, were still a nightmare packed with enemy forces, well dug in. The terrain was a tangled mess of coral, tunnels, and fortified positions. Every cave was a machine gun nest. Every tunnel led to more. Every ridge had to be taken one bunker at a time. I remember, one morning our squad had orders to clear a string of caves along what we called Bloody Ridge. We'd been fighting for the same 100 yards for 3 days. Every time we thought it was over, more of them would appear from some hidden tunnel. "Sullivan, take Rodriguez and check that cave," Martinez said, pointing to a dark spot in the wall, not far off. "We'll cover you from here." Rodriguez was a 19-year-old from San Antonio. Still thought he was untouchable. He'd only been with us 12 weeks. Brought in after our previous rifleman got both legs torn up by shrapnel. "You ever clear caves before, Rodriguez?" I asked as we crept forward. "No, Corporal, but how hard could it be?" he said, almost with a grin. I nearly laughed, though the moment was far too tense. Cave warfare was the deadliest form of fighting there was. You could never predict what you'd find inside. Maybe a lone rifleman, maybe 24 with heavy weapons and explosives. "Here's the plan," I told him as we neared the narrow entrance. "I'll lead with my rifle up. You stay close and keep an eye on any side passages. If anything moves and it's not me, you shoot." "Got it, Corporal," he replied. We got to the opening. It was barely 5 feet tall and just wide enough for someone to crawl through, not exactly inviting. It reeked of spent powder, sweat, and the unmistakable stench of decay. I called out in broken Japanese, offering a chance to surrender. No response. I glanced at Rodriguez. "Stick close. Stay sharp." Inside, the passage went back about 20 feet and opened into a larger area. My flashlight swept over bedding, empty bowls, scattered rounds, and the lifeless bodies of 3 Japanese troops. They'd probably been killed days earlier when we'd lobbed grenades in during our first push. But no cave on this island was ever really empty. There was always another tunnel, another corner. Rodriguez leaned in and whispered, pointing to a shadowed passage beyond the chamber. "There's another tunnel." I nodded and moved in that direction. It was even narrower. No walking here. We'd have to crawl. That's when I heard voices ahead, speaking Japanese. I held up a hand to keep us still. 2, maybe 3 men. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but it was urgent. I motioned for Rodriguez to stay put and continued forward on my own. The tunnel curved left, then opened again. I saw a flickering light up ahead, not from bulbs, but candles or oil lamps. I edged forward until I could see inside. 3 soldiers were huddled around what looked like a radio set, likely trying to reach someone. Their weapons were nearby, leaned against the wall, but not in hand. I raised my M1, aimed at the one nearest to me, and squeezed the trigger. He dropped instantly. The others lunged for their weapons, but I was already loading another round. My second shot hit the man in the center. The last soldier had just grabbed his rifle when Rodriguez showed up behind me and shot him twice before he could fire. 3 more down. But what we found next made my stomach drop. There were maps, detailed layouts of the entire ridge, tunnels, Everywhere, troop positions marked. We weren't just facing a small outpost, we were up against a vast underground fortress. Clearing this would take months. By the end of September, our battalion had taken such a beating that only 74 men were still standing out of 9 companies. My unit started with 180 men. By October, fewer than 40 were still fighting, but we didn't stop, we pushed forward. We did what Marines are trained to do. The heaviest fighting came at the end of October and into November. We were trying to crush the final enemy defenses tucked into the high ridge they'd fortified. For months, the 1st Marine Division alone had over 6,500 wounded or killed in just 4 weeks, more than a third of its total strength. We were exhausted, low on gear, and short on bullets. But every day, more enemy bodies were discovered. Some had been taken out in battle, others had ended their own lives rather than be captured. In total, our division suffered 1,300 dead, over 5,400 wounded, and dozens unaccounted for by the time it ended. But the island was finally ours. I'll never forget the day we fought our way into the command post of Colonel Nakagawa, November 24th, and after 70 days, we were still battling underground. It took us 3 full days of non-stop combat just to get inside. When we reached the final room, Nakagawa and his senior officers were already gone dead by their own hands. They had destroyed their equipment and torched their records. It was over. That last holdout had fallen. In that area alone, we found over 400 dead enemy soldiers, and there had been many places like it across the island. The scale of the violence was almost impossible to grasp, but we hadn't emerged unscathed either. This was the bloodiest amphibious landing in our history. Of the 28,000 American troops who served on the island, nearly 1 in 3 became casualties. Those of us who made it out weren't the same. We'd seen horrors we could never forget. Done things we'd carry with us forever. But we'd completed our mission. That's what I reminded myself as I crouched behind that coral slab on November 15th, listening to Martinez lay out our next move. We were going to win. We were going to take that slope. We were going to wipe out every last enemy who stood in our way, because that's what Marines do. Okay, listen up, Martinez said, glancing at his watch. In 30 seconds, Sullivan and Williams, open fire. The rest of us will move up the left side. Once we hit that rock cluster, we'll signal. Then you two move up. No one had any questions. We'd done this enough times to know the drill. I took my position behind the coral and aimed for the cave mouth. Williams crawled up beside me with his Browning automatic rifle. When Martinez gave the signal 3, 2, 1, we both opened up. Williams laid down a steady stream, while I picked off any signs of enemy fire. The enemy responded right away. But now they were under pressure, pinned down. Through my scope, I saw Martinez, Rodriguez, and Thompson rush uphill, ducking behind whatever they could. We kept firing to keep the enemy gunner from locking onto them. Half a minute later, they reached the rocks. Then it was our turn. Go, Williams yelled. We dashed across the slope. I could hear rounds cutting through the air around me, but Williams kept the enemy's head down with constant fire. We dove for cover just in time as rounds hit where we'd been seconds earlier. Well done, Martinez said. Now we do it again. This time, we're going for that ledge below the cave. The cave was about 25 feet up, cut into a cliff. That looked like it had been built for defense. The gunner had a clear line on anyone approaching, but we had no choice. Rodriguez, Thompson, you to loop around to the right and try to get an angle on them. Martinez ordered. Sullivan, Williams, you're with me again. I'm going up the middle. Straight up, I asked, unsure if I'd heard right. Martinez smiled for the first time in weeks. Yeah, someone's got to draw their fire. Might as well be me. That was who he was, always stepping into the line of fire for the rest of us. He'd been fighting in the Pacific since Guadalcanal and had probably saved more lives than anyone else in the unit. This'll be my last one, he said, pulling the pin on a grenade but holding the spoon. When I throw this, you two lay it on heavy. Rodriguez, Thompson, you count to 10 and swing around. We all hit them together. I checked my rifle. 3 rounds left, plus 1 full clip. It had to be enough. Martinez tossed the grenade. It bounced against the rock and exploded in a thunderous blast. Go. Williams and I opened up again. The enemy tried to return fire, but their aim was off. Martinez charged forward. His Thompson, roaring, he made it about 15 feet before he was hit. But he kept going, bleeding heavily, still firing until his gun clicked empty. The machine gun found him again, and he dropped. But at that moment, Rodriguez and Thompson reached the flank. Rodriguez threw a grenade, and Thompson poured lead into the entrance. The explosion sealed the deal. That weapon would never fire again. I rushed to Martinez. He was still breathing, barely. His chest was torn up, and blood foamed at his lips. Did we get them? He rasped. We got every last one, Sarge. He gave a faint smile. Good, that's good. He coughed hard. Take care of them, Sullivan. Get them home. 3 days later, November 27, 1944, Peleliu was officially ours. About 10,900 Japanese had died, along with 1,300 Americans. The blood spilled per square mile was higher than in any other Pacific battle. I stood on the same beach we'd stormed over 2 months earlier. Ships were now waiting to carry us home. Of the 13 in my squad who'd landed on September 15th, only 2 of us remained unscathed. The island had fallen quiet. The weapons were silent. The caves no longer hid enemies. The battle was done. Over 12,000 Japanese had died defending a tiny stretch of land just 6 miles long. They'd fought harder than anyone thought possible, turning every natural feature into a deadly position. But firepower, resolve, and sacrifice won the day. We secured the airfield. We removed the threat to the campaign for the Philippines. But the cost was immense. Both the 1st Marine Division and the 81st Infantry Division were so battered by the end. They were considered unfit for further combat. Yet we had achieved what we were sent to do. As I walked the ridges where so many had fallen, I thought of Martinez, Henderson, Morrison and the others who'd never go home. They gave everything for this patch of coral. And though it looked like a worthless rock in the ocean, it wasn't. Every fallen enemy here was one less we'd face elsewhere in Luzon, Okinawa, or even mainland Japan. Each tunnel we cleared, each hill we took, brought us closer to ending the war. The enemy had vowed to hold the island to the last man, and they did. Just 19 of them survived out of over 10,000. None were left when we were done. That was the thought in my head as our ship pulled away, heading toward medical care. And what came next? We'd survived. We'd carried out our duty, but the wind felt empty. Too many weren't coming back. I touched the pocket that held Martinez's dog tags. I had promised to bring them to his family to tell them how he'd fought until the very end. The island had fallen. The enemy plan had failed. The airfield was already in use for the Philippine operations. But that price would never leave us, they said. 3 days. It took 74. And we didn't leave a single one alive. That's how Marines fight. We finish the mission. We bring our brothers home even if it costs us everything.